What a wonderful name, Jesus. Isn't it neat to say that name? It's hard to say Jesus without smiling. And that's what we've been talking about the last couple of weeks. Not smiling, but Jesus. His deity, his humanity. The fact that he came and was tempted in every point, just like we are, yet without sin. The fact that he is lovingly involved with his creation and remains lovingly involved in his creation through his Spirit who lives in us. The title of today's message is Service and Suffering, and it comes out of John chapter 2 and 3. In fact, that's the reading for today. If you follow with the daily reading, I encourage you to read John, the Gospel of John, chapters 2 and chapter 3. The verse is John 3 and verse 14. And as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up. If you remember that narrative out of Numbers, you remember the pole and the serpent and how the people had to look on that serpent, and by faith they would be healed. Well, so it is with Jesus, isn't it? It's not by the actions that we do. It's by the love of Jesus that we are saved. It's interesting, though, we distort things in religion, and our flesh tends to distort things at times, too. Someone once said that money is the closest thing that we can have in order to play God. They continue to say that with money one can buy, sell, own, hire, fire, and remain secure with absolute peace of mind. Well, I say that smiling not because it's true, but because I know who said it, and I know the context they said it in, and that's absolutely not true. While there may be some temporal satisfaction in the abundance of finances, it's surely not close to being deity in any way, shape, or form, at least not how I read that in scriptures. There are many stories of those who had millions, tens of millions, or even hundreds of millions of dollars who within a short period lost it all because they became consumed by it, or left it all in utter depression and left the world. You see, money can't bring spiritual peace. And the love of money is described in Scripture as the root of all evil. Paul continued that thought when he said, which, while some coveted after, they have erred from the faith and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. Those who love money, those who chase after money, that is the supreme thing in life. Paul's saying, you know what? They've erred. They've pierced themselves through. They've hurt themselves by doing that. Now, at the same time, and you've heard this said, I'm sure, money itself is not evil. It's not evil or good. It's the love of money that is the problem. Because when people have money and they love it, they think that they have control of things. They perceive that they are in control. God deals, you see, though, with the heart. And the love of money is a heart issue. It's the passion towards things or the ability to attain things rather than God. Now, if a person has a substantial amount of money, there is certainly nothing wrong with that. God gives a greater amount to some and lesser to others, and that's God's choosing because he knows what that person needs. He knows what that person needs to accomplish, and God knows exactly who to give what. He also knows that some of us can work hard and attain a lot of money, so to speak, and before you know it, that becomes the main thing and not Christ, and we don't want that to happen either. He knows just what is right. The problem, again, is when we begin to love it. You say, what does the love of money have to do with Jesus' service and suffering? You know, Jesus demonstrated this principle about not loving things, not loving that which seems to man to be great. In fact, the whole narrative of the gospel, the beginnings of the gospel, is set not in some grand, magnificent palace, but consider this. Consider that Jesus came not in a palace, not riding with 10,000s of his angels. And he could have done that. And he has that. He could have come with more than 10,000 angels. But he chose not to. He chose to demonstrate to us that he is not consumed with power, and yet he is all-powerful. Now, how does that apply to you and I? Well, think about this. It actually brought the Father more glory for Jesus to come as a child, as a helpless baby, in a world that was, well, harsh to say the least, into a family that was not well off. A carpenter's family wasn't something that they certainly didn't have a lot of means. But that's what brought God the most glory. Why? Because he was demonstrating to you and I that God's heart is not about things. God's heart is about people. Jesus came as a servant. You see, and there's a picture there for you and I. As he came as a servant, so you and I are to have the mindset of what? A servant. Not to try and be lording over people, not to try and be in control of things, but to be a servant. Now, think about what we have that God's given us. And I'm not just talking about money. I'm talking about our influence. I'm talking about the people that we interact with. You know, Jesus didn't come and dominate people, did he? Because he came as a servant, because he came humbly, because he suffered, people came to him. You think about something. When people do a crusade, right? We know that in our modern vernacular, right? People get together and they're going to do a massive crusade. Think about the hundreds of thousands of dollars that go in to advertising that crusade. And I'm not being negative against it. There is certainly a place for that. We need that. We need that mentality within our culture that, yeah, we need to go back to God, and we need a point. We need a place many times to where all the things going on in our life culminate, and we say, yes, with that aha moment, we need Jesus. But think of it. We have to draw people in. And some people have their whole churches centered around drawing people in. And yet when Jesus came, he didn't have to just draw people in. He didn't have to do a mail out. He didn't have to get on TV and radio. You know what he was doing? He was loving people. He was serving people. He was being compassionate towards people. He cared about them. He spoke the truth in love perfectly. He discipled some men to go out and to preach this gospel. And you know what happened? They came by the hundreds. They came by the thousands. They filled the mountainside. They chased them back and forth across the sea. You think about all the things that happened in this time era. Jesus wasn't trying to draw people in. They came to him because they saw who he was. Jesus had a mission. And it wasn't to come in and take over the Roman Empire and put the Jews in their place and have some sort of power or things. He already had everything. You know what he was after? He was after their hearts. And you know how being after their hearts brought glory to the Father? Because Jesus was humble. Because Jesus didn't chase after things. Jesus chased after people. And the Father's heart is after our hearts. The application for us is pretty simple, but let me say this. You and I have a choice to make with our life. We can chase after things, or we can chase after people's hearts. And more than that, we can chase after things, or we can learn to follow Christ. And we can seek his heart and his attitude. What nobody tells you when you get saved, well, I shouldn't say nobody, what many people don't tell you when you get saved is that life might include some suffering. You might not have all the physical things that you dreamed of having when you were a child, but you know what you will have? You will have a life that's filled with glorifying God. And you'll take with you the one thing that you can take with you to heaven, and it's not all your stuff. It'll be the people that God allowed you to influence as you talked with them and discipled them.